So honored to be here with you today. Never done this before, but I'm going to start off with an apology. I show up today with some issues. Anybody else show up today with some issues? I'm so grateful to be here. You'll hear in my story, there was a part of my life that I tried to run away from. And I swore when God relieved me from that intense trauma that I was experiencing, that he was giving me a fresh start. I thanked him for it. And I said, I'm never going to go back and visit that again. And almost a week later, I had a pastor call me and ask me to come share my testimony. It's like I just wanted to leave that behind. And it occurred to me that he didn't bring me through that to keep it to myself. And so whenever I get invited, I share. But last night, this is my 5th city I've been in this week. And last night, I had the last flight out of Philadelphia, and it got canceled. So I just got home. I slept in an airport, which didn't really sleep. I got home, laid down. Thank goodness somebody called me because I passed out. Somebody called and I woke up, took a shower, and came here. So I feel a little discombobulated and kind of like my head's cloudy. So just pray that God's strength will be made perfect in my weakness because you guys are all a little blurry right now. But it is an honor to be here with you today. I was so encouraged as I stood here talking with Ed as you all filtered in, and to hear a little bit from him as each one of you walked in. He gave me a little bio of the amazing ministry that everybody in this room does. I have the privilege of working all across the country now, and it's this amazing contrast of what we think and see about the world we live in and how radically different it is if you're engaged in the world we live in. We hear on the news and everybody's trying to tell us everything's falling apart. And I'm not here to tell you everything's great, because all of the things that you do are desperately needed because our world's under attack. But there are so many people all over the country like you doing amazing work advancing the kingdom. And I just think we shouldn't believe the headlines, because there's just so many amazing things happen in places that you think are lost, totally lost. There are people, remnants that God has placed everywhere I go. And I'm just overwhelmed by it. So be encouraged. Today I'm just going to tell you or share with you the journey that God has brought me through. I'm not a pastor, but I love Jesus Christ. And he has and continues to just do the most beautiful work through me, which just blows me away because I know myself and I'm a mess. But isn't that the story throughout Scripture, right? Is he just doesn't use the people that all you would think have it all together, that have what it takes to get the job done, because it doesn't leave room for him to get the glory. So he uses a bunch of broken vessels to do the most amazing work. So thank you for letting me come and share. I grew up in Amarillo, Texas. I come from really humble beginnings. I don't know how my family got here, but they landed in Tennessee. Started with my great-grandparents. My great-grandfather was a sharecropper, and he fell in love with the daughter of the land that they were farming, and that was forbidden at the time. It's a radically different class. So they stole one of their horses and eloped, and wound up in the Panhandle. Wasn't even a town. There was work going on. And so they stopped, they were drilling oil wells, and he got a job pulling an ox and a plow to level fields to build oil field storage tanks. There's no town there, so there was no housing. So they lived in a dugout, which was just a hole in the ground. And they had a chuck wagon that would feed everybody there. And when my great-grandmother got pregnant, the work was wrapping up, and I guess it was easier to take the cook shack off of the back of the chuck wagon and just build a new one than it was to try to take that across the land to the new place. So because my great-grandmother was pregnant, I wish I was there to see how they negotiated who got to move out of the hole in the ground into the cook shack, because that was the Taj Mahal of the work. So somehow my family got to do it, and that's where my grandmother was born. And so that's where I come from, very blue-collar family. I was raised in a church, didn't get it. I thought it was a bunch of hocus pocus. And I had these kind of blue-collar West Texas principles about what it meant to be a man. We're supposed to not have any emotion or expression, that we are to be the strong ones for the people around us. So that's the way I live my life. That'll become relevant later. I was raised that a man's defined by his character and work ethic. And I was taught that anything I put my mind to, if I was willing to put the work behind it, that I could do anything I wanted. And unfortunately, that was way more attractive to me than the gospel at that time in my life. So I became, in hindsight, I didn't recognize this at that point in time, but I became my own God because I thought I was all powerful. And it worked for me. God blessed me intellectually enough that I could do well in school. He gifted me athletically enough that I got a scholarship to compete in athletics through college. I got a wrestling scholarship to the University of Oklahoma. Went there in 1984, which was right after the Summer Olympics. I thought I was a hot shot. We were the top ranked team in the country at the time. And I got there, and all of a sudden it hit me, I don't belong. We had 3 Olympians come back, 2 gold medalists come back, and I was intimidated and scared to death. And they gave us this big lecture. We had one of the largest recruiting classes. Wrestling's not a big sport, but we had 41 recruits that year. And the coaches sat us down, and you have all the Olympians and world champions and national champions pictures on the wall around us. And he said, out of all the people in the room, there will be 2 of you, statistically speaking, that might have your picture on that wall. And here's where the odds come in. There's going to be 13 of you that don't go to class and are disciplined enough to stay here and keep your scholarship and continue to compete. There's a handful of you that have already reached your full potential, and you're not going to compete at this next level. This is not like where you came from. You're going to have to really up your game. There's going to be others that thinks the college life and chasing girls is more fun. So there's just a small remnant of you going to make it. And then they handed out these shirts that said Oklahoma Wrestling on the front, and on the back it said, if it is to be, it's up to me. It's what I was told my whole life, okay? I know what that's going to take. I'm going to suck it up. I'm going to try to be one of those people whose pictures are on the wall by the time I'm done. So this became the way that I lived my life. When I graduated college, I got a job in corporate America. I was calling on all these businesses, and every business I went into, I could see all of the flaws and thought, man, if I just had an opportunity to run a business, I could show them how to do it, just to give you a sense of my arrogance. And so I had started my first small company at 14 years old. I didn't know, they didn't have entrepreneur classes in college at the time. I didn't know I was an entrepreneur, but I was. So I got a little bit of experience and decided I wanted to start a company, and I wanted to move my family to the Pacific Northwest. Everything, what did I want to do? So we moved just south of Portland, Oregon. We started a small commercial real estate company and a restaurant development business, and we got started. 2 years after we moved there, we had worked really, really hard to build the foundation for this business, not taking a day off, weekends or anything. And we were at a place where we could finally get some time away, and we needed the rest. So around this time, my wife had like an ulcer on the side of her tongue, but it didn't go away. And so we went to the doctor and like, oh, we think it's food allergies. I don't know if you know anything about amateur wrestling or not, but we don't get to eat. So for 5 years, I sucked on ice cubes to go to sleep because my mouth was too dry, and ate oranges and bananas, which I still can't stand. I still can't even look or smell them today. But we love food. My wife was athletic. We loved to eat. And so she would, when it was causing her pain, she would kind of follow the diet that they'd given her, but wasn't very disciplined with it because, man, we love to eat. And so it got to a point where the pain was so consistent and so bad that she's like, okay, I'm going to follow the diet. Nothing changed. Previously to that, it felt like it ebbed and flowed when she would be disciplined with the diet and when she didn't. And then when it got a little worse, she tried to be really disciplined, didn't have any effect. So we go back to the doctor. They're like, we're going to do a biopsy. And then we went surfing in Mexico for 2 weeks. And when we came back, this kind of tells you how old I am. We didn't have voicemail or cell phones at the time. We had answering machines, which was kind of a new thing and pretty cool. Come home and I have 12, 13 messages on there, and one of them is from the doctor saying, we got the results back, you need to call us when you get back in town. So we go, and he says, well, I've got bad news, it's cancer. I was 30 years old. So at 30, I don't know how most of you were, but for me, I thought I was invincible. So did my wife. It's like, okay, what does that mean? What do we have to do? No big deal. We'll get through this. And so we went through the process. You know, cancer is really ugly as it is, but head and neck cancer, I have to say, I think is probably the worst. Because you have three modalities to try to treat it. You cut it out, you poison it out, and you radiate it out. And so all of that affects who you are. But we went through that. 2 years to the date after she was diagnosed, she passed away. And it was devastating. I had two little boys, 5 and 6 when it happened. They watched their mom go through all this, and then they lost her. 7 and 8 years old when she passed away, and it turned our world upside down. And what I didn't know then that I know now is that if you don't heal what cuts you, you bleed on people that didn't wound you. And so my whole life of trying to be this man, carry this facade of being some tough guy, was a lie, first of all. So I was living a lie. And, you know, all of that stuff never resolved itself. So her loss wasn't just the impact of her loss. Her loss brought up everything else that had ever happened to me that I'd never dealt with. And I tipped over. I didn't know what was happening. I'm a pretty happy-go-lucky guy. I had no idea what was going on in me, but I felt like I was dying. I didn't want to see anybody, talk to anybody. I remember feeling exhausted at the thought of trying to walk down the hill to get my mail. I had become apathetic towards life. I was in deep depression. I didn't know what that was. So I didn't understand what was happening with me. I just didn't want to see people. I thought it was because I was so tired of talking about what we went through that I just needed some space between that. I needed to deal with it on my own without having to talk about it to everybody. So I removed myself. At the time, I was running around with a pretty rough group of guys. If you are a wrestler, the only thing you have to do after you complete college is to compete in the Olympics or on the world team. But there was this new, and you can't make money doing that. So there's this new thing that was emerging called, it wasn't called this then, but mixed martial arts. And so they were pitting people with all kinds of different skill sets in martial arts in one tournament to see which discipline would win. And a lot of my friends were doing that. So I was running with a pretty rough group of guys, but they cared about me as best they could. And so one time they kept trying to get me to go out with them, and I never would go. And finally one night I relented and went out with them. And I don't even remember what happened. Less than 5 minutes from the time we got to this bar, I had gotten in a fight with somebody. And it was the first time since I think that she got ill or diagnosed that I didn't feel that pain. Like I felt free it was less than a minute, but I felt free. And I needed that. I needed to feel free from that. I couldn't carry it. I've had physical injuries before that compare nothing to the injury of the heart. I hadn't ever let myself experience that before. So I needed this release. So I started this behavior of going out and getting in trouble. I think in part, like I was just hoping somebody would take me out. I don't think I'd say that, don't think I recognize that, but I was living very recklessly. And I was seeking out this freedom through hurting other people. And one night we got in another big bar fight and the police came. And as the cars were leaving the parking lot trying to get away before the police got there, I jumped in the back seat of a car of some people I didn't know. They took me back to their apartment, and they had cocaine and all kinds of stuff laid out across the apartment. And it's the first night that I did cocaine. And it did the same thing for me that fighting did. Is for a period of time, longer period of time, I felt this release. So it started this really dangerous behavior of self-medicating myself to try to feel better. And before long, I wasn't doing the dope, it was doing me. And, you know, they say the chains of bondage are too light to be felt until they're too strong to be broken. And that's where I found myself. Now I've isolated myself, I'm alone. My wife who passed away's family was from Texas, so was mine. We're 2,500 miles away from anybody that really knew us. And nobody knew what was happening to me. And so this behavior continued until it became so obvious that nobody could deny it, and they came. and this is what moves me to this very day, is that when I had given up on life, there were people that didn't give up on me. And I'm here today because of that, mainly because of the work that Christ did, but somebody had to be that bridge, and I had people that loved me enough to get in the mud with me and to wrestle through that. The first 2 rehabs they sent me to, I jumped out of the window and ran home. So I wasn't an easy case to serve. I got to rehab, they had me on suicide watch because I wouldn't eat. I don't think I was suicidal, but I wouldn't eat, so out of precaution, they put me on suicide watch. And to try to get me out of this funk and participating, they sent some guys down to talk to me. And these guys were in a rehab. They were in the same boat I was, but they had hope that I didn't have. And being a competitor, it was like, man, if they can do it, I can do it. And I started participating. And the second day, they told me I need to go see a spiritual counselor. And I said, I think that's a bad idea. You see, it's funny, for several years I would share my testimony, and I didn't recognize that at the time I didn't believe in God, but I was really angry at him. Isn't that funny? Like, how can you be angry at something you deny? But I was angry at God I didn't believe in, which is kind of crazy. But she said something to me that evening that I couldn't forget. And so the first night I remember going back and reflecting on it, and all I could come up with is I've done so much damage that I don't see a way to recover and live a life. Like, I see no path forward. So the next night, after all the curriculum, I'm in my room having these same thoughts, and I have no answers. I have nothing that I can cling to work for. And so with no other place to turn, I just fell to my knees and cried out and said, God, I don't know if you're real or not, but if you are, I quit. And I can't understand this to this day, but something happened that night that transformed me. I couldn't stop smiling. It scared me. Like, I'm supposed to be suffering here, and I don't understand what's happening, and I had this joy in my heart like I'd never had, even when things were good. And I don't even know who this God is, and I'm convinced it can't be the God of the Bible because I grew up with that. It has to be something else. So we were living in Oregon, and, they're a little funky sometimes with their faith traditions up there. And so I wound up going to this church that was like, everything leads to the same place. So they had Buddhist statues out front. Like, if you had one kernel of wisdom, they'd let you get up and talk. But one day I was there, one Sunday I was there, and they preached out of the Bible. And so I went home to open my Bible and started reading the book of Matthew. And, all I know is that he gave me eyes to see and ears to hear. The same stories that I thought I knew were radically different than what I'd ever heard they meant before. Again, some of this stuff is just miraculous. I don't know. I think you guys get it because of who you are and the work you do, but I don't know how to communicate what that's like. But it wasn't this God that had this list of rules that was restrictive on me, that was trying to just get me to be obedient. He loved me enough that he was showing me a way. And then he invited me in to his work of making all things new. We're constructs in his army, and we're giving the charge to make his kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. And we will not perfect it before he comes back. But that doesn't mean that we're not supposed to pour our heart, blood, and sweat and tears in a really broken world, seeing that the light and the kingdom are manifest. And I was like, what a beautiful battle, cosmic battle to get invited into and be a part of. I want to be a soldier in God's army. I want to advance his kingdom. I have no idea how to do that. And it was a really weird time for several months. When you own a business, it's not like you turn in your 2-week resignation and you walk away. It took 2 years to unravel that. And for 2 years, I was alone. I would take my kids to school in the morning. I wasn't working anymore. I was just working on selling the business. And for 2 years, I sat in my house and I watched pastors on TV and I read my Bible and I kept asking God why I was alone. And turns out that I wasn't alone, that he gave me those 2 years with him and him alone to know that I don't depend on anything other than him. What a gift of 2 years just to be alone with God. And then sell the company, start working again, relocate our family here. Met a bunch of amazing, beautiful brothers and sisters in Christ that discipled me. But everything in my life previously had been about building my own kingdom. If I knew you back then and talked to you, it was because I thought I could get something from you. It was this mutual, what can you do for me and what can I do for you? But it was surface level. Everything in my life was surface level, but I'd lost the taste for money. I didn't care whether I was seen or known by anybody before I was trying to become something. And I didn't know how to have real relationships with real people. So I'm kind of lost, and I'm trying to search and figure this out. I started going on short-term mission trips. I chased everything I could find, trying to find a place, and I never found my place. And what I know now is God was just maturing me. I wasn't prepared to help anybody yet. I wasn't prepared to help myself yet. I was just learning how to be dependent. And so for 10 years, this went on of just trying to find my place. And one day I was meeting with a friend of mine at a coffee shop, my accountability partner, and right after we sat down, he says, "I'm sorry, I know we had this meeting, but I've got to go." I was like, "Well, why didn't you tell me? I would have just let you go." And he said, "Because I was kind of hoping you would come with me." I was like, "Where are you going?" He said, "Well, a friend of mine's involved in prison ministry, and the warden didn't want them in the prison, but all of a sudden, the more they were there, the better culture started getting inside the prison. And so the warden started softening, and eventually he started letting them have one-on-one meetings with the inmates they had relationships with, 30 minutes once a month." So my friend goes in to sit down and meet with his friend, and the inmate tells him that he has good news, that he's up for parole. And my friend immediately starts congratulating him, and he's like, "I'm not going to go to my hearing." And he assumed it was because, like so many that have been incarcerated for long periods of time, it's intimidating. The world doesn't stop when you get locked up, and it's scary to come out to a world where everything has changed. And so he starts telling him, "Look, you don't have any opportunities in here, and I know it might be scary on the outside, but you have chances out there to build a life." And he's like, "I'm not scared of anything." He's like, "This is the only relationship I've ever had. The day I got incarcerated, my family sold everything I own. They don't love me. I don't know what love is, but this feels real to me, and I don't want to let it go." Willing to stay in prison over a relationship. My friend's passed away now, but there wasn't a day went by that he didn't beat the drum of that man taught him about the importance of relationships. And he promised him that if he did get paroled, that he would come out and that he would visit him, and he happened to be from the neighborhood in South Dallas called Bonton. I know you know this because I know the great work you guys do, but for those of you that don't do inner city work, the culture is a culture of kind of keeping everybody the same. So our kids will get beat up for making good grades, as an example. The worst thing that's ever happened to you, or the worst defect that you have as a person, becomes your nickname. But we're all human beings, and we long to be seen, we long to be known, we long to be heard. And so my friend is a great encourager. When he came down to have that meeting with that one man, other people started showing up to be fed because we're human beings, and we're longing to be seen and heard. And so people just started showing up, and the house was full, and so he needed help. That's how I got invited down. And the shortest version of the story is that sometimes you see things that you can't unsee. Everything that I was totally ignorant, first of all, but I was worse than ignorant, because it wasn't just that I didn't know the realities of my neighbors. It was worse because I thought I knew the realities of my neighbor. I'd believed the headlines. And I'm sitting in this room with people that have done some really horrific things, but what I see are these beautiful, capable, brilliant, kind, loving people. How do you reconcile, I'm sitting next to someone that I now call my friend that's killed 2 people, but I can't even see that in him because what I see is what's standing in front of me. How do you reconcile that? How do beautiful, capable, loving children of God do such horrible things? And what I learned after being there over time is that we have created systematically a division across our country that, my opinion, this is not sociological, there's no sociological evidence behind this or anything else, but what I believe is that when we fought to end slavery and then years after had the Civil War, people like me said, we're good. We've healed from that. We've overcome that. That was egregious and wrong and horrific, but we've ended it. And now we have civil rights. And now we have equitable. We see people as human beings. Maybe we can start to live into the promise of the Declaration of Independence. But that never happened. See, we created these pockets of poverty by design. And then we continued to reinforce them with public housing that congregated more people together, highways and railroads and rivers and all kinds of things. And I'm telling you today that we have 825 of these communities that we've carved out across our country that are home to over 40 million Americans. And with all the amazing work we do, what God has put on my heart is that we're not doing good enough. We haven't broken the barriers down. Everywhere I go across the country, I see this. I can predict when I go into a neighborhood the conditions of that neighborhood because they're all the same. Every inner city I go to has, tell me some of the big things that you would think of that are barriers for our community.
I'll say even in the location, there are lots of liquor stores, there are lots of gun stores, and there are lots of churches in those areas.
Do we have economic development in our areas of concentrated poverty?
No, most places like that are food deserts, actually.
So no economy, no food. Do we have health care in our communities?
No.
Do we have banking in our community? How's housing in our community?
Not housing.
What's transportation like?
Their feet, buses, those are the primary 2, or one car for multiple adults.
So here we are in 2024, almost 2025, in the richest country in the history of the world. And we have barriers that are basic human essentials that instead of solving those problems, we put Band-Aids over them and feel better about ourselves for doing so. And so I love you guys. Sometimes I get told that I'm a little harsh and provocative, but I don't mean that with harm or malice. I mean it to cajole us, to prompt us, to disrupt us into thinking differently about truly loving our neighbors. And how does that look differently than even the great things that we're doing today? And it's not enough. 7 years ago, I got invited to give a TED Talk, and they wanted me to talk about Bonton, and it's like, I don't feel good about that. I'm not Bonton. I'm an outsider. God has put me there to build a bridge, to hear the plight of my community, and to code switch and talk to my people about what their life is like in a way to build a bridge so that we can heal. That's what I think. Why would God have a white guy move into a predominantly African-American community that was a freedman's community I know nothing about? Everything I think I know is wrong. Who am I? But I think that it's because he wanted me to listen and to represent their story to other people that might not have the opportunity to hear it in the way that I did. And in doing so, bring people together so that the kingdom comes. We heal, we become united. John 17, they will know him by our love and unity. How can we love each other and be unified if we don't know each other? And so I'm sorry for maybe some of this stuff, maybe not. You guys are probably pretty seasoned and appreciate this, but I just want to say I know some of this might be provocative. I got up there, so I went to my community and said, look, they kept calling me and I kept telling them no, and they kept calling me, and so I went to my community and I said, look, they want me to tell your story. I keep telling them no, but I don't feel good about it. You should be telling your story. Like, nobody wants to hear from us and hear our story. And sadly, I know that to be mostly true. So they said, please go tell our story. One day, it will be us doing it. So it fit into this idea of what I felt like my assignment was simply to be a bridge builder. And so I'll go try to build that bridge because they gave me permission to do so. I am not a good speaker, and I'm not and I just speak with my heart. So I don't prepare for things. I just share what God puts on my heart. But I never prepared for anything like I prepared for that, because I felt the weight of the history and all the people I love to represent them well. But I never slowed down to think about what is the purpose of a TED Talk. It's to share ideas that have the power to change the world. And I'm up there, they wanted me to talk to, this was in our early days, and they wanted me to talk about the food desert thing and the farms. Unfortunately, that's the sexy thing. Nobody wants to talk about the hard things. So they tell the easy stories to tell, the stories that look good on TV and that read well in papers. I didn't want to talk about food deserts because it misleads people that somehow that's our problem. Our problem is a systems design that keeps our boot on our neck so we have no chance to flourish, and then we point our fingers when they don't make it. So I gave this TED Talk. It was one of the most humiliating things I had done, mainly because it occurred to me for the first time how short we are falling. Because the guy that spoke before me was a smart cities guy talking about predictive analytics and the fact that we're about to have autonomous vehicles on our road that make over 2 billion calculations a second at 70 miles an hour to be statistically safer than cars that we drive. That's a big idea. I can't imagine the amount of intellectual property that goes into thinking through and building something like that. I can't believe, because I'm so simple, I can't believe that there's human beings that can create that. The lady that spoke after me was even more special to me because she was talking about organ transplantation, which in our community we suffer from more than double the rate of cancer, stroke, heart disease, diabetes, childhood obesity. Men in our neighborhood will live almost 12 years less than the average lifespan of a man in the county that we're in. And diabetes is such a problem that absent kidney transplants, which is really hard to get if you're poor, they're gonna die. And I'm tired of watching this happen, but what she's saying is the whole thing of you checking a box on your license that God forbid you get in an accident, and the complication of trying to get your organ to the hospital where the person that needs it is while the integrities of it's intact. The danger of the surgery itself, the danger of the rejection of a foreign object in your body afterwards, all that is a thing of the past, because they can take stem cells from your own body and make a brand new heart, liver, and kidney and lung, just like God did the day we were born. And I'm up there talking about, in the richest country in the history of the world, in a city where we import 40% more food than we can consume. We have a 40% spoilage rate. We're not smart enough to figure out how to see that our brothers and sisters have fresh food to eat. And I'm just going to tell you that I hope that challenges you in the way that it did me, is that if we can have cars make 2 billion calculations a second at 70 miles an hour, and if we can make brand new organs out of stem cells, we can solve these problems. And if we haven't done it by now, it's because we fall into the trap of the status quo. And so for those of you that do this work, I don't know if you've done this or not, but it had me go back and start thinking about, I'm a business guy. I don't know anything about nonprofit work. And I was struck at the difference between how the sense of urgency, the connectedness around vision, the accountability that comes in the business world, and how radically different that is in the nonprofit world. And if we do that for money, how much more sense of urgency, how much more discipline and accountability should we have when our currency is human beings? People's lives depend on us as Christians to address their issues alongside them, not for them, but alongside them. So I started doing research and found out, philanthropy is an old word. It's got a Greek root, but it emerged in this country following the Civil War. If you think about it, we were almost all rural and agrarian. Over 90% of everybody had their own farms. That's how they made their money back then. 90% in one industry, growing food. And then all of a sudden, we have the Civil War. And after the Civil War, you have families and people that are traumatized, people that have deeper kind of wounds and deeper kind of needs than we've ever had before. So philanthropy starts to emerge. Philanthropy that's different, because before philanthropy was caring for your neighbor. Now it's becoming philanthropy where professionals are doing it. It's a radical shift. Then all of a sudden we have World War I, which sparks off the Industrial Revolution. And for the first time in the history of our country, more people are living in concentrated city centers than rural. And the economy shifted from agrarian to manufacturing. So now we have families and people that fought in the Civil War, families and people that fought in World War I, and the people they left behind and didn't come home to that all need care. And you saw this boom of the social sector, of nonprofits, professionals coming in to sweep in and help. Beautiful. But if you think about it, from 150 years ago to today, what has changed in the social sector? I would argue we do it the same way we did 150 years ago. I would argue that there might be some technology like volunteer software and donor software that helps us engage people more effectively, but we go about our work in the same way, and yet we live in a world that is more dynamic now. There's more change that will happen in 2025 globally that's happened in the history of the world before in terms of our culture and how we live in our society. We need to be dynamic. We need to be innovative. When's the last innovation that you saw in the social sector? And so I almost feel like we're in this place where we've been lulled to sleep because we have 150 years of doing things, and we believe that we have these artificial boundaries that we can't cross. Oh, donors won't do that, and we make all these assumptions without challenging those assumptions. And so where that leaves us is we live in this really broken world with all kinds of complex problems that we've never before seen. Trauma advances generationally, and we haven't healed from decades and decades of different traumas. The world has radically changed, and it's going to require us to think differently. There was a point in time not that long ago where human physiologists told us that it was impossible for a human being, a human body, to break a sub-4-minute mile. Just humanly impossible. And then Roger Bannister did it. And now you're not a miler unless you run a sub-4-minute mile. And what God has put on my heart is we need an example of Roger Bannister to shake things up so that we start challenging ourselves to think outside the box, disrupt the status quo, and to live in. Does anybody have a Bible here? Would you pull up Isaiah 58? If you don't mind, Tim, would you read Isaiah 58, 6 through 12? There's so many scriptures that speak to this, but to me, there's so much that's said in these 6 verses that align with what I'm trying to share with you today, that I want to share it with you and hope that maybe it impacts you in a similar way that it does me. 6 through 12? Yes, sir. Let me give you this.
Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bounds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house when you see the naked, to cover him and not hide yourself from your own flesh? Then shall your light break forth like dawn, and your healing that shall spring up speedily. Your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and he will say, Here I am. If you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger and the speaking wickedness, if you put yourself out for the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then shall your light rise in the darkness, and your gloom be as noonday. Keep going. And the Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your desire in scorched places and make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water, whose waters do not fail. And your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of the streets to dwell in.
To me, that's my mission statement. You know, the thing about loosing the chains of oppression and breaking the cords of the yoke. I'm not a pastor, but the way I understand that is that the things that hold my people back, the things that limit the full expression of who I am in them from being manifest. Bonton Farms is just discipleship. But what discipleship is and authenticity is not just teaching them God's word, teaching them to obey God's word and modeling God's word and then sending them out. It's seeing that they become the fullness of who God created them to be. So in Bonton, when we have no food, no economic development, no transportation, no health care, housing, and I can keep going, and all I do is minister to them, how in the world am I breaking the cords of the yoke? How in the world am I loosening the chains of oppression? And so it's this spark to think outside the box. It's this challenge to truly believe that our God can do anything. He creates all things, controls all things, and make all things new. We can do this. So I don't know all of the amazing work that you guys do, but I hope that you'll think about this in a new way and say, are we doing this work as best we can? Are we fallen prey to just kind of doing things the way they've been done? And if we take all the boundaries down, because God has no boundaries, if we take those boundaries down, what could we then do? And I promise you, my experience in ministry is all I have to do is take 1 foot out of the boat and put it on the water. And God starts to do the rest. But I have to get out of the boat. I can't do it from inside the boat. So I don't know if any of that makes sense or not. Ed, am I out of time? You're standing up? Okay, 5 minutes. So I want to give you a quick backstory as an example of discipleship that happens at Bonton Farms. On the screen behind me is a gentleman named Eddie. Eddie got released from prison to a halfway house with 5 other men from the same prison. Eddie was non-communicative. He didn't speak. Nobody had ever heard him speak of this group. These other 4 gentlemen took him under their wings, and when they got to the halfway house, they learned about Bonton Farms, terms of their parole. They all needed to get jobs. None of them had resumes. None of them had driver's license, on and on. So Bonton Farms is a great first place for people to go to get that experience and start meeting that criteria while they're building themselves up. So Eddie comes. I've never served somebody that doesn't talk, that doesn't communicate. So we would do our normal thing. We start our days with devotion and prayer, and then we give out our work assignments, and then we go work. And Eddie would participate, but as soon as we would break, he would go sit in a chair. If you've been to Bonton Farms, behind our coffee house, there's this big, beautiful pecan tree, and there's some Adirondack chairs back there. And Eddie would go sit in one of those Adirondack chairs under the pecan tree. And in the fall, the pecans start falling, and Eddie would pick them up and start shelling them. And every day we would walk through and say, "Good morning, Eddie." Nothing. We would do our thing. He would go back and sit in that chair, and we would repeat, hoping and praying there was some breakthrough. And we start noticing that as Eddie's shelling those pecans, the squirrels and the birds keep coming closer and closer to him, and he's feeding them pecans. And then one day I walk in and say, "Good morning, Eddie." And he said, "Can I talk to you?" And we all froze. I don't know, some of you are around my age to know, you remember those old E.F. Hutton commercials? They used to say there'd be this busy dining room with all this noise, and when E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen, and all of a sudden everything would go silent. That's what it was like at Bonton Farms that day. And Eddie says, "Can I talk to you?" And I said, "Of course." He said, "I don't trust you, but these squirrels and birds are showing me how important relationships are, and I don't know how to do that, but I need to try. Will you try with me?" It's his first words. So as Eddie starts opening up and he tells us his story, Eddie was sentenced to 27 years in prison, but not just prison, 27 years in solitary confinement. For 27 years, he was locked in a cell for 23 hours a day, 1 hour a day. He got to go out in the yard by himself, not with other people, and then back in his cell for 27 years. At year 20, Eddie is trying to think about how to take his life. "I can't do this anymore." And he tells me this beautiful, he's so poetic. He says, prisons smell the same 24/7, 365. But in the spring, we never know when the seasons are, but in the spring, we would hear the lawnmowers, And we would always ask the guards, we had a 2-inch window at the top of our cell that we couldn't open ourselves, but when we heard the lawnmowers, we would ask them to open that window for us because the smell of cut grass is like perfume. And this spring that Eddie's contemplating taking his life, he asked the guard as the lawnmowers come to open the window, gets the smell of fresh cut grass, and a cardinal flew in his room. And Eddie, he's scared, he's so traumatized, he's scared of anything like that. So he's trying to shoo the cardinal out of his room. From year 20 to 27, that cardinal came back every spring. He comes to Bonton Farms, and what happens under that pecan tree? So that's the backstory. I want you to hear from Eddie the rest of it.
My favorite part of my job is every day being close to nature, being close to the animals, smelling the grass, the blooms from the flowers. I've been here at the farm almost a year. This farm means to me something I always dreamed of. My name is Eddie Solis. I just turned 58 years old on February 12th. I come from a small town. I was abandoned. I never knew my mother and father. 6 brothers, with me 7, sister. My grandmother raised us all, but it was hard for her. Little by little, my brothers, my oldest one turned me on into heroin. I was around 13. We would just wake up for the drugs. Once I knew that what it was doing to me, it was too late. The damage was done. We never celebrated Christmas, Thanksgiving, holidays. I don't even know their birthdays. They don't even know, to this day, they don't even know mine. I did a burglary because I needed money to supply for my drug use. And that's when they caught me. And this last sentence, I did 27 years flat. In those 27 years, I did isolation. And isolation is segregation. You're only going to call out that cell 1 hour a day. Those 23 hours, you're going to spend in that cell. I've seen a lot of things happen in them cells. People lose their mind, talking to themselves, cutting themselves, hanging themselves. The first year, I had to put the world to the side. This is not for me no more. I'm not going to come out in a long, long time. I had to face reality. The prison, it was going to be my home. That little cell was going to be my home for 27 years. Over 20 years passed. And I was thinking to myself, when are these people going to let me go? I'm not a murderer. I'm just a drug addict. They threw the book at me for just heroin. You know what I'm saying? When I was going to parole on my short-way discharge, and they had to release me on October the 25th. I was supposed to go to Abilene. It's a halfway house over there. But they didn't finish the paperwork. And my friend here, Darren, said, I'm going to get you out of there and bring you to Dallas. Right now, I'm trying to be more independent with myself. It's not easy doing paperwork or things like that. I'm still having trouble right now getting the food stamps. And right now, I live with 7 roommates. It's not easy living with 7 guys in an apartment. Like I lived close to 27 years in that cell, and I'm used to living by myself. Like I told my mentor, I wish one day I can just live by myself. I don't have to clean after other people's. And I just pray to God that one day it'll happen. But I just have to be patient. I believe that God is going to open the door. But it will be a blessing. It's something that I really will cherish when it happens. It's healing, especially here. Little by little, I'm breaking out of my shell. I was still like in that egg, like the chicken, just picking at it, picking at it, picking at it. But I was still suffocating, not knowing what these things are. Love, kindness. But little by little, I'm already cracking out of that shell. I can breathe now. I can breathe. I always wanted to know what it meant to be, a family. I never knew it. That's why I break my back and bones and that farm. I want to give back. I want to make things bloom over there, What I didn't realize when I went into the gangs, what I thought of a family, this is what a family really is. I'm grateful that God brought me here. This is what I always really needed. It took me 58 years. But I found it. And I cherish it.
Eddie's story is one of so many. And while he has come so far from where he started, the road ahead is long. Bonton Farms walks with Eddie and others to offer the foundation needed for a fresh start, such as jobs, housing, transportation, fair credit, and a family to belong to. But the joy you see comes from within, and the transformation profound. Will you join us